Welcome back to the channel USA Liberty World Coin today. We're taking a closer look at two fascinating U.S. quarters, the 1978 D Washington quarter and the 1776-1976 Bicentennial Washington quarter. They may look like ordinary pocket change. Let's get started. This 1776-1976 U.S. Bicentennial Washington quarter may look like nothing more than a worn, dull piece of pocket change, especially when the surface is scratched, the edges are tired, and the original shine has completely disappeared. But that ordinary appearance is exactly what causes so many people to overlook it. At first glance, a heavily circulated example can seem almost uninteresting, with flattened details, darkened areas, small marks, and signs of decades of handling. Yet there is much more to examine before deciding what a coin is worth. The reason collectors pay attention to these quarters is not simply because the date says 1776-1976, but because this coin represents a major moment in American history and exists in numerous grades, compositions, mint varieties, and potential error configurations. Millions were produced, which means the average example is not automatically a rare treasure, but individual pieces can become much more interesting when condition, mint designation, unusual characteristics, and documented auction history come together. That is why a coin sitting unnoticed in an old collection, jar, drawer, or inherited box deserves a closer look before anyone spends it. Even a coin that looks damaged can contain clues that are difficult to see without careful inspection. And the first mistake many people make is judging its value entirely from its appearance. The history behind this quarter makes it especially fascinating. The dual date 1776-1976 was created to commemorate the 200th anniversary of American independence, and the reverse design was changed from the traditional eagle to the famous colonial drummer design created by Jack L.R. The obverse continued to feature George Washington, while the special dual date connected the coin directly to the nation's bicentennial celebration. The quarter was part of a much larger commemorative coin program that also included the Kennedy half-dollar and Eisenhower dollar. Depending on the issue, bicentennial quarters were struck in different compositions, including copper-nickel versions for circulation and special collector issues containing silver. That distinction is extremely important because two coins can look remarkably similar while having very different collector appeal. The 1776-1976 date itself therefore starts the investigation, but it does not finish it. Collectors look at the mint mark, composition, strike quality, surfaces, luster, preservation, and possible varieties or errors. The historical connection adds another layer of demand, because this was not simply another annual Washington quarter. It was a coin produced to mark 2 centuries of American independence, making it one of the most recognizable commemorative issues of the 20th century. Now look closely at the coin itself, because identification begins with the visible details. On the obverse, you should see George Washington facing left, with the inscriptions United States of America, Liberty, and In God We Trust, while the distinctive dual date 1776-1976 appears below. Turn the coin over and the first thing that should immediately stand out is the colonial drummer surrounded by the inscription United States of America, with EPLURIBUSUNUM above, and the denomination $quarter below. The drummer reverse is one of the easiest ways to recognize the bicentennial issue, and the date combination is another major confirmation. Next, examine the mint mark area and determine whether the coin carries a P, D, or no mint mark, depending on the particular issue. Then inspect the edge and overall color, because the composition can provide another clue. Do not stop after identifying the basic design. Use a magnifying glass if possible and examine the lettering, stars, date, drummer, rim, and fields for unusual doubling, missing details, cracks, off-center striking, planchet problems, or other characteristics that might separate an ordinary example from a more interesting collectible piece. Condition is where the story becomes much more complicated. A circulated bicentennial quarter can show scratches, discoloration, contact marks, dull surfaces, rim damage, and worn high points, and those characteristics can dramatically affect collector interest. On the other hand, a coin with unusually strong detail, attractive surfaces, original luster, and minimal contact marks can command much more attention. This is why collectors generally compare coins by grade rather than simply asking whether a coin is old. A sharply preserved example can stand out immediately when placed beside a heavily circulated piece. Proof and special collector issues can also be evaluated differently from coins that spent years in circulation. For viewers searching through old change, the important lesson is to examine what you actually have rather than assuming every 1976 quarter is identical. Depending on the specific variety, composition, grade, and verified market history, exceptional examples have been discussed at price levels such as $920, while stronger and more unusual pieces can move into the $1,650 range. These figures should be treated as potential high-end market outcomes for qualifying examples rather than guaranteed prices for every coin, because condition and authentication are critical. The most exciting possibilities come when several desirable characteristics appear together. Imagine finding a bicentennial quarter with exceptionally sharp details, strong original surfaces, an attractive appearance, and a recognized variety or striking error that specialists consider significant. Suddenly, the conversation changes from ordinary pocket change to a serious numismatic examination. Depending on the exact characteristics and verified sales evidence, higher-end examples can reach figures such as $2,750 or even $3,850 in the kinds of exceptional circumstances that collectors watch closely. The important point is that a large number printed or struck does not mean every individual coin is identical in collectible quality. Modern commemorative issues can contain dramatic differences between ordinary circulated pieces and rare errors or top-condition examples. This is also why photographs alone can sometimes be misleading. A coin may look spectacular under bright lighting while hiding scratches, cleaning, or surface problems, while another may look dull in a casual photograph, but preserve important original characteristics. If you believe you have an unusual specimen, compare it with reputable auction records, established grading references, and certified examples before assigning a dramatic value to it. There is another reason this quarter deserves attention. People often underestimate coins that were actually used in everyday commerce. The bicentennial quarter was released during a period when Americans were surrounded by the celebration of the nation's 200th anniversary, and these coins became part of ordinary transactions across the country. That means some examples have spent decades passing through hands, vending machines, cash registers, drawers, and coin jars. A circulated coin can still be historically interesting and collectible, and certain varieties or errors can remain desirable even when the coin is not in perfect condition. The strongest values, however, generally depend on something verifiable: exceptional preservation, a recognized variety, an authentic mint error, a scarce composition or issue, or a documented record from a respected grading or auction source. At the extreme end, an exceptional and properly authenticated specimen could potentially be discussed in a range approaching $4,900 or more. But that kind of figure should never be assumed simply because a coin has the 1976 date. If you encounter a claim that every bicentennial quarter is worth thousands, slow down and investigate the exact coin, because the details are what determine whether a headline price has any connection to the actual piece in your hand. One warning is especially important for anyone hopping to discover a valuable example. Do not clean the coin. Scrubbing, polishing, rubbing, applying chemicals, or trying to make an old quarter look shiny can permanently damage its original surfaces and reduce its appeal to serious collectors. A naturally toned or dirty-looking coin can sometimes be far more interesting than a bright coin that has obviously been cleaned. Instead of trying to improve its appearance yourself, handle it carefully by the edges, keep it in a protective holder, and document both sides clearly. Check the date, drummer reverse, mint mark, composition, surface condition, and any unusual characteristics before seeking an expert opinion. If you think you have discovered a significant error or an unusually high-grade example, professional authentication and grading can be especially important before relying on a large price estimate. A number such as $920, $1,650, $2,750, $3,850, or even $4,900 plus should be viewed as a possible high-end benchmark for exceptional qualifying examples, not as an automatic value attached to the date alone. The real excitement is in discovering whether your particular coin has the characteristics that collectors are willing to pay a premium for. So the next time a worn 1976 Bicentennial Washington quarter appears in an old collection or your pocket change, do not dismiss it simply because it looks dull, scratched, or damaged. Turn it over, study the drummer, check the dual date, inspect the mint mark, examine the surfaces, and look closely for anything unusual. This coin carries a powerful piece of American history, and its collector potential becomes much more interesting when condition, variety, composition, and authenticity are taken into account. Some examples may remain modestly collectible, while exceptional pieces can attract substantially stronger interest and potentially reach impressive prices when the right characteristics are verified. The key is patience. Look closely, avoid cleaning, and never judge an old coin only by its first appearance. You might be holding a piece that deserves far more attention than you originally thought. Thanks for watching, and keep checking your coins. You never know what you might find. Next coin, the 1978 Washington quarter, is exactly the kind of coin that can fool you at first glance. It may look dull, scratched, darkened, and heavily worn, with the bright original luster long gone from the surface. The raised details can appear softened from years of circulation, and small contact marks may cover Washington's portrait, the lettering, and the reverse design. To someone who is not familiar with coins, this appearance can make the quarter seem like ordinary pocket change that has already reached the end of its useful life. But collectors look at a coin differently. They look at the date, the mint mark, the surfaces, the strike, the preservation, and especially the possibility that an otherwise common-looking example might have unusual characteristics or exceptional condition. The 1978 D was struck at the Denver Mint, and PCGS records a substantial mintage of 287,373,152 pieces, with the standard composition being copper-nickel over a pure copper center. That combination explains why the coin can look familiar and ordinary while still attracting attention from collectors searching for high-grade examples. The important point is that age alone does not determine a coin's value. What matters is the complete story written into the metal, and the 1978 D has enough history and collecting interest to deserve a much closer inspection. One reason this quarter is so frequently overlooked is that 1978 does not immediately sound like a classic rare coin date. It was produced during the final years of the original Washington quarter era before the design eventually changed in later decades, and millions of examples entered everyday commerce. Because so many were made, people often assume that every 1978 D quarter must be worth only its face value. That assumption is exactly where collectors begin looking more carefully. A coin can have a large mintage and still become desirable when it survives in an unusually high grade, displays attractive surfaces, or contains a recognized minting variety or error. The Denver D beneath the date is therefore an important detail, because it confirms that the coin was struck at the Denver Mint rather than Philadelphia. On a circulated example, you may have to tilt the coin slightly under good lighting to separate the mint mark from surrounding wear. Look closely at the date 1978 and then move your attention to the small d after that. Inspect Washington's cheek, jaw, hair, and the open fields around his portrait. These areas reveal how much contact the coin has experienced. On the reverse, examine the eagle, lettering, rim, and open spaces for scratches, dents, unusual marks, or striking characteristics. A careful examination can turn a coin that looks completely ordinary into an interesting candidate for further research. The historical setting also adds another layer of interest. The 1978 D quarter belongs to the copper-nickel-clad generation of Washington quarters that followed the removal of silver from regular quarter production in the mid-1960s. By the late 1970s, these coins were deeply integrated into American everyday commerce, passing through stores, vending machines, cash registers, pockets, and coin jars across the country. That history is often visible directly on the coin. A circulated 1978 D may have a gray or brownish appearance, tiny scratches, flattened high points, and a general lack of shine because decades of handling have gradually changed its surface. Collectors understand that this wear is part of the coin's history, but they also recognize that preservation can dramatically separate one example from another. A quarter that spent decades in circulation is fundamentally different from one that was placed aside shortly after leaving the mint. That is why condition matters so much. A heavily circulated piece may have modest collector interest, while an exceptionally preserved example can attract serious competition. PCGS lists the auction record for a 1978 D regular strike quarter at $1,527.50 for an MS-67 Plus example sold by Heritage Auctions in 2016. That documented result is important because it demonstrates how dramatically the market can change when a common-looking coin reaches an extraordinary certified grade. When examining your own 1978 D quarter, do not focus on just one scratch or one shiny spot. Start with the overall condition. Hold the coin by its edges rather than touching the surfaces, and use a bright but indirect light source so that the details are easy to see. On the obverse, Washington's hair, cheek, and jaw are especially useful areas for judging wear, while the fields can reveal whether the coin has been heavily exposed to contact. On the reverse, examine the eagle and the surrounding lettering for sharpness and possible abnormalities. Next, inspect the rim carefully. A strong, even rim with clear lettering can be a positive sign, while severe dents, flattening, or damage can reduce desirability. Also look for unusual doubling, off-center striking, die cracks, missing details, or other mint-made characteristics. But be careful because damage that happened after the coin left the mint can sometimes look like an error. Magnification can help, but you should avoid automatically assuming every unusual mark is rare. The most important habit is comparison. Compare your coin with reliable images of authenticated 1978 D examples, and when appropriate, have a qualified grading service or experienced numismatist examine it. A collector who spends a few minutes inspecting the date, D mint mark, strike, surfaces, and overall preservation may notice details that someone else would completely ignore. Condition is where the biggest opportunities can appear, because collectors often compete intensely for coins that survive with exceptional preservation. Imagine several 1978 D quarters sitting together on a table. One is dark, scratched, and worn from circulation. Another has moderate wear but retains some attractive detail. A third has strong original surfaces and very little evidence of handling. Even though all three have the same date and mint mark, the collecting market may treat them very differently. Depending on grade, eye appeal, certification, and any recognized variety or error, values discussed by collectors can move through levels such as $920, $1,650, $2,750, and $3,850, with extraordinary pieces or unusual examples potentially being discussed at $4,900 or more. These figures should be viewed as possible high-end targets rather than guaranteed prices for every 1978D quarter. The strongest documented benchmark is the PCGS auction record of $1,527.50 for an MS67 plus regular strike example. That distinction matters because an online claim of a huge price does not automatically mean every coin of the same date is worth that amount. The exact grade, authenticity, surface quality, certification, buyer demand, and special characteristics all matter. Still, even circulated coins should not automatically be discarded, because they can provide historical interest and may contain features worth investigating. Another important factor is collector demand. Washington quarters have an enormous collecting community because the series is accessible, familiar, and extensive, giving beginners and experienced numismatists many ways to build collections. Some collectors focus on complete date and mint mark sets, while others pursue top grades, varieties, errors, attractive tunning, or coins with exceptional eye appeal. The 1978D fits naturally into these collecting goals. Someone assembling a Washington quarter collection needs to consider the Denver issue, while someone specializing in late 1970s clad quarters may be particularly interested in finding an unusually sharp example. This creates a market where condition can matter more than simple age. The coin is also an interesting reminder that rarity is not always about how many were originally produced. Sometimes the key question is how many survived in a particular grade. PCGS identifies the 1978D at MS67+ and records the $1,528 auction result, illustrating how a coin from a large production run can still become a high-value collectible when preservation reaches an exceptional level. So if your quarter is worn, do not assume you have found the highest value version, but also do not assume the coin is completely irrelevant. Inspect it first, because the details determine the story. There is one warning that every collector should take seriously. Do not clean the coin. If your 1978D quarter is dirty, dark, toned, or scratched, the temptation may be to polish it until it looks bright and new, but that can permanently damage the original surface and seriously hurt its collector appeal. Harsh chemicals, abrasive cloths, polishing compounds, and aggressive rubbing can leave unnatural scratches or remove the original surface characteristics that graders and collectors want to see. A coin that looks dull may actually be more interesting in its original condition than after an attempted makeover. Instead, handle it carefully by the edges, keep it in a suitable holder, and document what you see before making any changes. If you believe the coin has exceptional preservation, an unusual mint-made feature, or potentially valuable characteristics, professional authentication and grading can provide a much stronger basis for determining its market position. Remember that the dramatic price levels of $920, $1,650, $2,750, $3,850, and even $4,900 plus are not automatic prices attached to every 1978D quarter. They represent the kind of high-end possibilities that depend heavily on condition, rarity, and collector demand. The documented PCGS record gives us a more reliable reference point, but the hunt remains interesting because your particular coin has to be examined on its own merits. So the next time a worn 1978D Washington quarter appears in your change, do not dismiss it simply because it looks old, dull, or damaged. Turn it over, check the 1978 date, Locate the small D mint mark. Study Washington's portrait. Examine the reverse. Inspect the rim and look carefully at the surfaces under good lighting. A heavily circulated coin tells one story, while an unusually preserved coin can tell a very different one. And that difference is exactly what makes coin collecting so fascinating. The 1978 D is a reminder that value is not determined by appearance alone, and that a coin produced in large numbers can still become highly desirable when condition and rarity within a grade enter the picture. If your example shows something unusual, take your time before making a decision, because rushing can mean overlooking the very detail that makes the coin interesting. Keep it safe, never clean it, and have exceptional examples properly evaluated. That simple habit could make the difference between casually spending an old quarter and discovering something worth keeping.